Imagine you've been operating Driver Inc. for several years. Many years ago, you went to apply for a job, and the prospective employer explained how this would work. He would be your broker rather than your employer. As a broker, he told you he would pay you a fee for every load hauled, plus GST or HST. He said that you will work only for him and perhaps only use his equipment and only drive on the routes when and how he tells you. He assured you that as an independent contractor who will have so many deductions and pay the small business tax rate that your cash earnings will make you so much better off than if you were just an employee. And your scheming broker may have kindly referred you to an accountant or bookkeeper who does this all the time for fellow workers. Plus, your broker explains to you, perhaps with a wink, that the GST paid for each load, he told you it's yours to keep. It's tax free. Doesn't the deal sound surprisingly good? Who wouldn't jump at it? I'll return to the GST payment later. It's important, so don't forget. Now imagine that the Canadian Revenue Agency audits you. CRA concludes their audit and says, you didn't declare your income correctly. You owe us $26,000 for each year in taxes, plus interest and penalties. This may not be just imagination, it may be a real life nightmare that befalls those who are victims of Driver Inc., because drivers have been convinced by schemers that the driver will be better off by misfiling their taxes. But when audited, the driver finds they must pay tens of thousands of dollars in taxes, plus interest and penalties. Hello, I'm Robert Harper, President of the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Welcome to the third episode of AMTA's special series focusing on Driver Inc. In our first episode, we discussed the impact on the safety of our roads. In the second episode, we discussed the abuses of employment standards in foreign workers. In this, our final episode, we will discuss the abuse of Canadian taxpayers. Let's look at two scenarios where two drivers receive the same take-home pay of approximately $72,000. In the employee model, the company that's behaving the right way pays almost $30,000 in benefits, including CPP, EI, WCB, vacation and stat holiday pay. In the Driver Inc. model, the scheming company doesn't pay benefits, and the employee is convinced to avoid $30,000 of personal taxes. The driver is paid less on each load to get to the same net pay. Plus, the driver is also paid $8,000 of GST, financed by taxpayers. If you are a Driver Inc. operator and you've been told that you can claim the small business deduction and that you can claim all sorts of expenses and split your income so that you pay little to no tax, you've been more than likely lied to. If CRA audits you, and they eventually will, you could be liable for taxes and many of your deductions will be denied. In addition, at that point, as you pay CRA for that big opportunity you were promised, you will then realize that you've missed out on overtime, stat pay, or vacation pay. Now, fortunately, if a Driver Inc. realizes they should have been treated as an employee, they can file a complaint with Employment and Social Development Canada. ESDC will investigate, and if they find that Driver Inc. is an employee, ESDC will order the individual be paid to correct the misclassification. But unbelievably, if there are 100 Driver Inc. contractors, ESDC does not look at the other 99 drivers to determine if the scheme is widespread. And ESDC will say to the employer, please don't do this again. Unfortunately, ESDC has not historically been allowed to share this info with CRA to demonstrate a scheming company that is participating in Driver Inc. And because ESDC may only issue warnings and won't come back for a year or two, the scheming company may unincorporate one entity, then incorporate a new company to continue the scheme. They'll transfer their trucks to a new scheming company and wait for ESDC to investigate and slap them on the hand, then begin the cycle again. Now let's return to the payment of GST. This is income for Driver Inc., pure and simple. However, when a shipper contracts with a carrier, the carrier invoices GST to the shipper. When a carrier subcontracts a load to another trucking carrier, it is not GSTable. However, the scheming carrier pays GST to the Driver Inc. subcontractor, knowing it isn't GSTable, but the schemer claims the GST credit from taxpayer, which is not allowed. If I had to put it bluntly, this is GST fraud. They use the 5% plus HST in other provinces to finance cost reductions and undercut competitors by stealing from taxpayers. Some companies may pay GST on interline freight by mistake and claim the ITC, but the Driver Inc. structure suggests a more compelling argument that points to fraud. For the companies scheming to create Driver Inc., they are growing this scheme by fleecing Canadian taxpayers to finance their unethical business. In some jurisdictions, this scheme is of such a complex and intentional nature that it might be referred to as racketeering. They use loopholes in enforcement to commit fraud and use other tax avoidance schemes to steal tax dollars, enrich the schemers, and undercut law-abiding carriers and abuse drivers. You might ask, is this scheme really having an impact on the trucking industry? Who would be using these services? Surely people would notice. Have you ever heard of someone selling electronics out of their trunk who is always able to undercut retailers by 30%? Did you think this was perhaps someone dealing in illicitly obtained goods? What if they operated out of a storefront? It would be harder to tell. For many who buy trucking services, they may be unaware, but others may turn a blind eye to why some carriers can undercut competitors by 30%, because in our current economic environment, everyone is looking to save costs. We trust that the government is enforcing the laws to ensure that there is a legal, lawful playing field. Of course, we don't blame Driver Inc. drivers or those buying their services. It is the schemers that grow Driver Inc., and it is a problem being driven by the current federal government. This issue has accelerated over the last decade in the industry, in part by neglective enforcement, but also by adding costs and regulations that make working outside the legal boundaries that much more advantageous to grow the scheme. Some observers would say this is another example of the federal government that is known as being serious about unserious issues and unserious about serious issues. Driver Inc. is a serious issue for those that it impacts, and it has been getting that unserious attention from politicians. Canadian taxpayers deserve better, as they have been financing an illegal scheme through lack of enforcement. That lack of enforcement that begins with tax abuse has encouraged those lawbreakers to abuse employees, temporary foreign workers, and Canadian taxpayers, and put the safety of our roads at risk while allowing schemers to buy trucking assets, leveraging ill-gotten taxpayer funds. Some might say this is akin to money laundering. And even worse, those drivers who drive as employees for legitimate carriers have not seen a wage increase in years because the illegal schemers are stealing business viability via the tax abuse that the federal government will not address. Driver Inc. is a scourge in the trucking industry. It has impacts on safety and employee working conditions. But at the root of this rot is the lack of enforcement of tax policy. That is the responsibility of the federal government and its multiple agencies which will or cannot take the time to address. But what can you do to fight this growing scourge? Demand that the federal government, through the Minister of Revenue, or your MP, enforce the law. Tell CRA to perform GST audits on carriers that pay Driver Inc. to deny GST ITCs and charge them for fraud where warranted. Demand trucking companies issue T4As for their driving subcontractors so that CRA can validate if income tax returns have been filed. Request government agencies coordinate audits of those companies that participate and require them to treat employees like employees. When a complaint has been investigated on behalf of one Driver Inc., and if ESDC does determine that driver is an employee, then it would be proper that the auditors investigate all the other drivers and see if they are employees too. Ensure CRA and other government ministries or agencies like ESDC can share information and cooperate within the federal government and with the provinces to identify the employers who are flouting employment agreements and avoiding taxes. The trucking industry, the drivers working for legitimate employers, need your support to end Driver Inc. Please help us today. Taxpayers deserve to be treated fairly. Taxpayers like you shouldn't be financing abuses in the trucking industry because of unserious government oversight. Your roadways, your community, your province, and your country depends upon it. I'm Robert Harper for the AMTA. Please help us end the abuses of Driver Inc.